Executive Director of the Yukon Transportation Museum, to say a few words.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is it working? Is it different? Okay, great. Welcome to the Yukon Transportation Museum, everybody. It's good to see you here and for this wonderful event. Maybe we could all just do a round of applause for democracy.
Thank you, Jana. Thank you so much. So now we are officially starting it. So first of all, I would like to say thanks to all our great 5 candidates for sparing their moments to attend. And I would like to thank to you guys too. So please say high five to your neighbor. Candidates too. Please say nice. It's very important to learn about your neighbor. That's what we will be talking today. So it's important to know who is sitting beside you. First of all, we would like to acknowledge from deep core of our hearts that we live in the traditional territory of Lemphers people and the Christian friends, and respect the greatest of all the 14 Yukon First Nations, which is very important. We also honor all the cultures of the world which are living in the Yukon and which make our Yukon look like a lovely and colorful painting. Although we are very proud of who we are, but we also respect the differences. So this is my personal quotation, which sometimes I use. At the end of the day, doesn't matter what the style of clothing is, everybody is just a fellow human being with the same feeling inside the heart. We can do things together and we can dance together. There are many thanks, huge thanks to Yukon Transportation Museum, Jana Swals, and Jonas Westor. We have 2 Jonas. Jonas, the sound guy. Not the Jonas, the candidate. And I would also like to thank our volunteers who helped me setting all these things up. They are Veronique Lassange, Emma Seward, Emma Dobson. Thank you guys. Thank you very much. I would also like to thank Yukon Arts Center for providing these lovely stands. So we are thankful to Yukon Arts Center too. And we are also thankful to all these 5 candidates for coming and spending their time and for preparing for this debate. Thank you everybody. Thank you very much. I personally would like to say thanks to all the people who contributed to the questions. I've seen so many emails, so many questions, which I included in this great debate. So they deserve thanks too. And most importantly, you guys, you people, you beautiful human beings, for coming, sparing your time to participate in the great democracy. Because as citizens, it's our responsibility to know and to participate. And thank you so much. Thank you guys. Thank you. I would like to start with opening statements. So, I would like each candidate to give opening statements just for 2 minutes. I would like to start from Joseph.
So my name is Joseph Zelezny, and I'm the People's Party of Canada candidate for Yukon. Happy to be here this evening. As Gurdeep mentioned, we have a democratic society in Canada, and the foundation of it is free speech. If people have been paying attention in recent months, Maxime Bernier and the People's Party of Canada has been the only party that's been fighting for free speech and protecting it, and not voting for censorship, and not cowering down to political correctness. For decades now, there has been only one acceptable position among politicians and intellectual elites. More, and more immigration. The result is that all other parties have the same position. They are all in favor of mass immigration. What is mass immigration? Well, the Liberals have increased immigration levels from an average of 250,000 per year during the last decades to 350,000 as being the goal in 2021. That's a 40% increase. People often wonder, why are houses so expensive? Well, if there's a lot of people coming in, they have to live somewhere. And that's one of the biggest issues that's facing us today. The same way that there's a maximum occupancy in this building, if there's more people, it wouldn't be safe for everybody to exit if there was a fire. And so it's the same thing with Canadian infrastructure. We don't have extra infrastructure that's readily available to house everybody. And so that's the number one reason why the People's Party of Canada is proposing to reduce immigration levels so that everybody can actually have a good standard of living and so that we can take care of the needy that are among us, whether they're homeless, unemployed, or hungry. The statistics being proposed or being mentioned conflict with what we hear, for example, from the food bank, where there's more and more needy all the time. We need to focus on economic immigration to ensure that people are able to support themselves. In an Angus Reid poll last year, 49% of Canadians said immigration was too high, and only 6% wanted to accept more immigration. We also need to stop our reliance on the United Nations for refugee selection and give priority to refugees belonging to persecuted groups who have nowhere to go in their neighboring countries. For example, Christians, Yazidis, and members of other minority religions in majority Muslim countries. Members of the Ahmadi community and other Muslims in these countries who are persecuted because they reject political Islam and adhere to Western values, and also members of sexual minorities. Finally, Canada needs to withdraw from the UN Compact on Migration. Our immigration laws need to be made in Canada for the interest of Canadians. And the primary aim of Canada's immigration policy should be to economically benefit Canadians and Canada as a whole. We can't be responsible for the whole world.
Thank you so much. So next is Daddy Bagnell from Liberal Party.
Before I start, if anyone has a technical questions about the election, the Chief Electoral Officer might go, put your hand up. Is there, if you have a technical question? And there's some empty seats here. Put your hand up if there's an empty seat beside you. I don't mind if people move up while I'm talking. There's some up at the front here. I think Gurdeep, I also want to acknowledge one of the traditional territory of the Kwanadad and the Tonquachi Council. Thank Gurdeep for doing this. We worked really hard on immigration, so but I'm sure people may not be aware of all the items, so it's a great chance to get them out. I'd also like to thank the Rachel and the volunteers of CARES, who's been so loving to needed refugees and the great work they have done. And I think all of you know how wonderful immigrants and refugees are that have come to the Yukon. Anyone that has met them, wonderful people, great workers, and so it's just, we're obviously very enthusiastic about them. You've heard myself and our government mention time after time how diversity is a strength for us, culturally, economically, through trading and exports, through import selection, see all the great things that we now have access to here, and products and foods that we wouldn't otherwise have. Socially, 1 in 3 immigrants volunteer, and you know how important volunteerism is. Yukon, 2 or 3 are on social organizations. They've helped start 1,100 companies recently for Canadians, 60,000 new jobs for Canadians, and of course everyone knows how to fill in the labor shortages. So we've done a number of things because of our enthusiasm for this and the technical need for it. We've removed unnecessary barriers to help newcomers come. We've reduced the residency to 3 out of 5 years. It used to be 4 out of 6. To get your PR from language, we've decreased the range where you require the language test from 18 to 24. The parents and grandparents program is very popular. We've increased that 4 times from 5,000 to 20,000. The processing time for citizenship from PR, we've reduced from 2 years to 1 year. We've reduced the backlog of applications of 75,000 by 80%. We've cut the wait times for caregivers from 5 years all the way down to 1 year, and reduced 63% of the 62,000 backlog of those. The grandparent limit from 5,000 to 10,000 limit, and we've reduced 83% of the 16,000 backlog of those to 25,000. And there had a wait list, whose grandparents from 7 to 8 years, and we've reduced that down to 2 years. We restored refugee healthcare for refugees, which I'm sure people understand that, and welcomed 53,000 Syrian refugees, and we have a new settlement program to help, even more to help with settlement starting this fall. So all those things to show our enthusiasm and appreciation for our newcomers.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Gurdeep, and thank you to your team for organizing tonight. Welcome, everyone. Bienvenue, mesdames et messieurs, Danche. Hope you're doing well. Comment ça va? Comment está? My name is Jonas. Je m'appelle Jonas. I didn't prepare anything formal tonight, but I thought I'd take this moment to tell you a few things about me. My family first came to Yukon in the 1940s, so I'm the 3rd generation of my family. I make Yukon my home. I'm raising my children here. Many of you might know me from my previous roles in life. I was the head brewer at Yukon Brewing 20 years ago, so I'd like to think that I affected many of your younger selves positively many years ago. I was a bar manager here for a lot of years. I was a singer in a heavy metal band. Some of you might wonder why a singer in a heavy metal band is before you tonight. The short answer to that is about 10 years ago I had open heart surgery, and when I was recovering from the surgery I realized that I was on borrowed time now, and the best way that I can spend that borrowed time is giving back. So within a year of recovering from the surgery, I bought a membership in the Yukon Party. I volunteered to sit on the executive, and a year later I became president, and 6 months later I was the executive assistant to the Premier of the Yukon. Now, at the end of the day, I just want to have the opportunities that I think Yukoners deserve. I want our children to have clean air, be able to drink the water, and have safe, affordable housing, and rewarding careers here. And I want these things for all Canadians. Because I think what makes Canada special is this is a place where we all, whether we've been here for generations or we just got here last week, this is where we work together to provide those opportunities for a better life for our children. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonas. Thank you very much. Just 2 members from NDP.
Good evening. I recognize that we are on the traditional territory of the Kwamintun and Tonquichan peoples, and that all of us here tonight are here on Turtle Island. And I also recognize that this debate, our conversation tonight, is about immigration, refugees, diversity, and inclusion. And this can be a challenging subject. So as we proceed with our conversation this evening, I would ask you to look out for yourselves and look out for each other. Because when we talk about these issues that in many cases are so close to our heart and traumatic, we also have to guard ourselves from doing more harm, from experiencing or reigniting. We have to
One, two.
Yes.
I can give you mine.
Okay, how's this? Okay. As I was saying, the conversation tonight is going to be difficult. It can be very difficult for some. These are areas that are very close to our hearts. So when we're talking about some of these issues, I want us to not only look out for ourselves, but also look out for each other. Because when we're talking about immigration or refugees, I think of my dad. I think of someone who had to flee his country with his family because there was persecution. And when we talk about diversity and inclusion, I think about people that can't feel safe, don't feel safe in their communities. They don't feel safe living their lives as themselves because they might get fired by their employer for announcing that they're coming out. They might experience violence and harassment for walking out on the street and being visible or perceived as different in some way to another audience. So when we think about our conversation tonight, please be conscious about this and remember that we're talking about lived experiences. And it's because of this, because of those lived experiences and how we want to change the way that people live their lives, we want to make sure, the NDP wants to make sure that everyone can live their life to the fullest here in Canada. And that's why our plan's actually called A New Deal for People, because everything that we do, everything that we care about, people are fundamental to it. So if it's making sure that our immigration is fair and the system is fair and works for people, the people come first. If it's making sure that we're talking about gender inclusivity or ending the blood ban that exists for LGBTQ2S people, then we want to make sure that that comes first. People always come first, and I am here to work with people to really understand the challenges that people have in their lives and help them address those challenges in a meaningful way. So thank you very much.
Okay, I prepared a 3-minute speech, and then this morning Gurdeep told me it was only supposed to be 2 minutes, but that it would be fine if it was 3 minutes, and I think it would be a crying shame if you didn't hear my whole 3-minute speech. So indulge me on this one, please. So I'll start out by acknowledging that we are on the traditional territory of the Kwamandun First Nation and the Ta'am Quachin Council. We can't separate ourselves from immigration. It's not us versus them. Except for the Indigenous people in Canada, we are all immigrants or descended from immigrants. You may think of the Green Party as the party for the environment, and we most certainly are. The environment and the climate emergency are the background, though, to every other issue in this election, whether it's housing, infrastructure, healthcare, or immigration. The Greens are also about people, and people are at the core of the immigration discussion. When it comes to immigration, the Green Party and I see newcomers as a source of incredible skills, creativity, energy, and enrichment for Canada. Canada is a proudly multicultural society that welcomes and thrives on diversity and inclusion. The key is integration. We know that immigrants come to Canada in search of greater freedoms and opportunities for themselves and their families. For Canada, though, we need immigrants for the labor, the skills, and experience they bring to the Canadian and the Yukon job market. Yukon currently has both the lowest unemployment rate and the highest job participation rate in Canada. What that means for businesses is that staff is hard to find and hard to retain. Some Yukon businesses are finding it a challenge literally to keep the doors open. So programs like the Yukon Nominee Program, which brings in newcomers to fill labor shortages, are very helpful. The Green Party fully supports increasing immigration in those geographic areas of Canada where we have labor shortages. We also want to reform the immigration system to ensure that it's just and fair, and when I say just and fair, I mean both to existing Canadians and to newcomers. We will process the immigration backlog and speed up the reunification of families. We will increase funding to multicultural associations so that they can better support immigrants and increase language training. The Green Party wants Canada to continue to be a safe haven for refugees and to meet its international obligations. We also recognize that no one chooses to be a refugee. People are driven from their homes by war, by famine, by persecution. So the Green Party will ensure that Canada enhances its role as a global citizen by helping other countries and the organizations within them so that they can address the problems in those countries and so their citizens can stay in their home countries in safe conditions with their families, just as Canadians are able to do so in Canada.
Thank you so much. Very soon we are going to start the question and answer session, but I would like to remind our wonderful candidates about 1 minute rule so that we can cover all the questions. We have many questions. So during a session, we want to cover all so that we can include as many voices as we can. So 1 minute, please. The questions have been chosen by the moderators, some experts, and people participating. I received so many emails through my website, and I tried my best to include as many as possible. However, due to shortage of time, all the questions couldn't get selected, so sorry about that. So, very quickly, we are coming to our main topic, which is immigration. Little background, going deeper into the history, immigration is the unfortunate story of human freedom to restriction. For centuries, humans have been moving from one place to another in search of food, shelter, better life, etc. When there were no governments, people were freely moving from corners to corners of the earth. According to the Yukon Center, the first people in the Yukon migrated from Asia near the end of the Ice Age. A long time ago, people have been moving with full freedom, even from continents to continents on foot. But then what happened? Restriction. With the arrival of various rulers or governments, some rules were created to restrict this human movement. With time, these rules became tough. Strange things like passport, visa, borders started to emerge. Some people started to call them immigrants. Slowly, these rules became brutal. With the passage of more time, lots of stereotypes related to immigration started to emerge. Our ancestors who were walking freely on the planet Earth probably would never have imagined this. So we are coming to very first question. History experts say that everybody except First Nations is an immigrant in Canada. Do you consider yourself an immigrant? We'll start with Lenore.
I consider myself a descendant of immigrants. I am an immigrant to Yukon, I will say that, because this is not the place where I was born. I was born in Ontario, and both of my parents were born in Canada, but my grandparents were born outside of Canada. So within the context of the Yukon, I am an immigrant.
Justin?
Everybody is born somewhere, and when we talk about birth, sometimes we use the term indigenous, but let's not confuse indigenous with indigeneity. So wherever you're born in the world, you are indigenous to that place, but that does not mean that you are an indigenous person or someone that has suffered through persecution and marginalization in society. So I would say that I, as a first-generation Canadian, am indigenous to the place that I was born, but I am not an indigenous person. And I really respect the indigenous first keepers of this land.
Thank you. Jonas?
Thank you. I guess I, like Lenore, despite the fact my family's been here for many generations, my parents left when they were pregnant with me, so I was not born here. I grew up outside, so I too am an immigrant to the Yukon, I guess. On one side, my family's been here for many generations, but on my mother's side, she herself is an immigrant. So at the end of the day, I'd like to think that we're all Canadians.
Thank you. Barry?
Well, I don't need it. It's a short answer. Like Lenore, my family, my grandparents, my four grandparents, please remember this on St. Patrick's Day, my four grandparents all came from Ireland.
And Joseph?
My parents escaped a communist totalitarian regime from Eastern Europe and came here under political asylum program. So that's my family.
Thank you, everybody. Our next question is, supporting immigration. It's kind of similar in other ways, it's different too. Do you support immigration? If yes, why? If not, why? We'll start again from Lenore.
I support immigration for two reasons. First, because Canada has obligations within the context of the global community to provide refuge to people who need refuge. But in terms of what I'll call the regular immigration, the planned immigration, Canada absolutely needs refugees. We have an aging population, which means that the average age is getting older and older, meaning that there'll be more retired people in a few years, and those more retired people will need more health care, and that has to come from somewhere. The birth rate is not such that we are replacing ourselves. We need immigrants, and we have thrived with immigrants.
Thank you. Justin?
I support immigration. Immigration allows for us to grow as a country, as a nation, as a people. It allows us to broaden our diversity and just show how welcome we can be as a nation. It also allows us to help countries that are in trouble. In the opening remarks, we heard that, what do we do if the country's on fire? How do we exit? Well, some countries are on fire. And we can be a safe haven for those people when there is conflict and trauma and strife and war in those places. So we need to be open to immigration to help those who have no other resource or place to go.
Thank you. Jonas?
Thank you. Yes, I absolutely support immigration. Canada is a country of immigrants. I think our system needs to be fair and orderly and compassionate. We need immigration to power our economy. We need to be compassionate to those who are truly fleeing hardship, war, famine, calamity. And as Justin said, often Canada is the safe haven for those people. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think you heard from my opening statement my enthusiasm for immigration. You know, in 1971, there were 7 workers for every retired person in Canada. By 2035, there will only be 2 workers for every, at the rate that we're reproducing. 2 workers for every retired person and the aging population. So it's 2 for 1 to pay for education, to pay for all the pensions, to pay for health care, to pay for all the things we need to pay for to help the vulnerable people that Joseph talked about. Cultural that it brings to us, their dances, their songs, their colorful clothing, their food, and they're a great addition and to our society. Also bring great ideas from their home countries.
Thank you, Larry. Joseph?
So yes, definitely support immigration. It just needs to be sustainable. The primary aim needs to be the economically benefit Canadians. And we need to make sure that those who are among us that are vulnerable or unemployed or homeless are also taken care of. So we need to lead by example. We need to take every measure to make sure that proper resources are available, whether it's Immigration Canada or Canadian Border Services Agency or RCMP. We also need to make sure that it doesn't put excessive burden on our shoulders, as well as not to be used as a political tool to pander by votes among immigrant communities, because that actually results in more division. We need to unite under our values that are based on freedom and free speech, and ensure that immigration isn't used to forcibly change Canadian culture.
My next question is, first to Bagnell. An MP's office receives a lot of immigration-related inquiries from public. If you get, there are actually 4 questions. They are kind of related, kind of different, so that's why we have put them together. If you get elected as an MP, what efforts will you make to support immigration-related inquiries at your office? Second, do you think that appointing a dedicated staffer for immigration inquiries at your office will serve the purpose? Third, how candidates plan on supporting immigrants in the Yukon? Newcomers also need mental support. Is there any budget for that? What other initiative will we take to listen to immigration-related inquiries?
Thank you, and thank you very much for asking that question, because first of all, just on the mental support, for the first time in history, our government made a large contribution to each province and territory for mental health, because I think that hasn't been taken seriously enough or funded seriously enough, or enough resources put towards in history. But I'm really glad you asked about the staff in the office, because I wanted tonight sometime to give a real, even though the government department should take care of most of the requests, people come to us when they're having issues and problems. And I really wanted to give a shout out to Susan in my office, who is that virtually dedicated. Susan, where are you? Put your hand down. Back there. I get so many thank yous for the stories. All the time you've helped us in our difficult situations, and she spends most of her time, sometimes overtime, helping people in need with immigration. We've had over 1,500 interactions over the last year. People from 69 countries that want to come to the Yukon have dealt with us. So we've taken it seriously, and we've worked really hard to help people that get through the very complicated and difficult immigration and refugee system.
Thank you, Larry. Jonas.
Thank you. What efforts will I make? As my understanding is, immigration files take a significant portion of the Member of Parliament's office, particularly considering where we are today with our economy and the number of people that are wanting to make Yukon home. I think it's premature for anyone who's not in the position to talk about dedicating staffing allocations to an immigration-specific post, though, because I honestly don't know what the budgets are, and they have to be spread out accordingly for to serve the entire constituency. But for supporting immigrants in the Yukon, I think that the Member of Parliament's office is often your first line of defense, or your first line of contact, I should say. But that is to direct people to the appropriate offices. So I would be in support of having more CBSA and other immigration staff here in Whitehorse. I've heard many stories where people have to leave the Yukon or go to a border crossing to fill out a very basic piece of work. So it would make a lot more sense to me if that was available here in town. And when it comes to mental health, I think we can all admit that there's a deficit of mental health support in the Yukon and across Canada right now that we do need to do better. But I do think that any efforts we have to make have to put Canadians first. And that said, I also think that lends itself to the argument that the types of immigration and immigrants we should be prioritizing, and to be clear, I'm talking immigrants as opposed to refugees, but we should be prioritizing immigrants who have a strong support structure here in town. They have skills, they have family, they speak one of our official languages already.
Shame.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Justin.
So it's my personal belief that we need a Citizenship and Immigration Canada office here in Whitehorse.
Yes.
The reason for that is because so many of these applications are time sensitive. And what that means is that when you have someone who's in one of the communities and they're going through the PR process and they need to submit some paperwork, then they have to get that paperwork in on time. And that might go through Susan, and she might be able to review it. It goes down to Vancouver, I believe, or wherever it gets intaken, and it's reviewed there. Now, if there's an error, if there's a problem with that paperwork, then it gets sent back to the person and they find out that there's an issue with it. And all that equals is time. So the time that it takes for someone to find out that there's an issue with their paperwork when there's already time sensitive to begin with might mean that by the time they know there's a problem, they're actually on their way out because they've failed to meet the requirements of the program. So the way that we address that, the way that I would address that, is by having a CIC office here in Yukon, in Whitehorse, to deal with those needs. Now, when we're looking at the dedicated staffer, yes, that would be through the CIC office. Oh, mental health, yeah, definitely there's a mental health deficit. I mean, we've heard there's money coming into the territory for mental health. We also have heard very recently about many rivers, so there's a disconnect there. We know that there's money coming, but we're still having a major mental health shortage of services in the Yukon. And yes, those services may have been reallocated, but are they actually serving the people who use those services? Because I've heard from many people who said, I don't trust those agencies. I can't get the service I had. So let's make sure that whatever mental health services that are in place are secure, are funded long-term, and going to be there for whoever is using them, be them Yukoners, be them immigrants, be them refugees. And the other initiatives that I would take is just listen. I would go and have an open door policy to anyone that says, I am experiencing difficulties in this community. I'm having problems with my PR status. I'm having problems with the Yukon nominee program. Yes, they're different jurisdictions, but that doesn't mean that the member of parliament or the office cannot assist someone in navigating those processes. So making sure that you understand what people are facing, what their challenges are, and being there to help them is critical. And the last thing I want to add is previously we heard about refugees that might be truly fleeing their country, and I'm just trying to truly fleeing. It's like, oh, is something chasing? No. If someone is fleeing danger, there's no truly fleeing. You flee because you are in a crisis.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Lenore?
With respect to the MP's office, I'm actually going to agree with Justin that this might be a situation where at this point we have such a large number of immigrants in the Yukon that it would justify having an actual federal government immigration office here. If we can't do that, and I know we can't even get a proper Canada Revenue Agency office here, but there needs to be some regular service from the government. I would say that this is beyond the scope of what the MP's office can provide. When we're dealing with immigrants, especially, we have a large percentage of our immigrants for whom English is not their first language, and so speaking over the phone is not nearly as good as if they could speak in person. And so it seems to me that we should be having, if we don't have an actual office here, we should be having regular visits from Immigration Canada staff to the Yukon to meet with people here so that they are not having to deal with everybody at long distance. With respect to the MP's office itself, though, the most important thing is, of course, is have the knowledgeable, well-educated staff working there, and I hope that I would do that. And that staff has to have the resources available to them, including so that they can make referrals to people. I can tell you, as a lawyer, I get requests all the time. People are looking for immigration lawyers, and there isn't anybody in the Yukon. And so we're having to refer people to outside. There's also immigration consultants, but there's issues with respect to those. The important thing, though, is that somebody here, and I'm going to say the MP's office is a good place, needs to have that information available to them that they can provide to interested immigrants who need that information. The last thing I'm going to mention is a few years ago we actually had for a period of time, we had legal aid for refugees in particular, but immigrants in general, and that was done on a pilot project basis, and it wasn't renewed, but there was plenty of demand for that when we had that here.
Thank you so much.
So, People's Party government would actually repeal the Multiculturalism Act and put that money towards helping immigrants or refugees, anyone new to Canada, to actually integrate into Canadian society. And so that would actually cover things like language training and mental health, and ensuring that adequate resources are available for all of these types of claims. In addition to that, that's one of the reasons why at this point immigration and the amount of total immigrants and refugees needs to decrease, because we don't have adequate capacity to process everyone. And so it'll go hand in hand in terms of adding additional resources to CBSA, RCMP, and immigration staff, as well as doing face-to-face interviews and ensuring that newcomers align with Canadian values and societal norms, and that'll actually result in more successful integration.
Shame.
So basically, I wouldn't personally dedicate any staffer for local office, because it would create some redundancy, and one of the important points behind the People's Party of Canada government is to reduce the amount of bureaucracy and streamline things so they're efficient. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So our question 4 is that many newcomers wrote me if they are having an immigration-related issues. MPs usually write a letter to the concerned visa office abroad. That is good. But the problem is that many times visa officers do not care about MPs' letters and make a totally contradictory decisions. If you get elected, what other efforts will you make to improve this system other than just writing a letter starting from Larry Bagnell?
If we have a situation like that, first of all, there's audit of those offices. Sometimes there's both locally hired and work in those offices, and so it's very important that the integrity and efficiency of the service is continued, because there are, as Gurdeep says, a number of times we get feedback on those offices. So it's very important that we make the audits of that service and that work. If we have a problem with a particular embassy, the Canadian immigration staff in the embassy, and the case doesn't make any sense, we don't know why it is, that we go to the minister's office, and we've been successful in a number of cases in doing that.
Next is Jonas.
I think that, as I said earlier, I believe in a fair and orderly, compassionate immigration system. So I think it's the Member Parliament's job to ensure those tenets are upheld. But at the end of the day, I also am aware or cognizant of that there should not be political interference from a Member Parliament's office in expediting certain cases over others. We're not supposed to demonstrate favoritism. So I think your job is to ensure that it's fair, that the process is working, and it's compassionate. It considers the needs on a case-by-case basis. And I think if the Member of Parliament and their office is being run efficiently, those three things would be met.
Thank you very much. So next is Justin.
Well, first off, I believe that assisting someone in need is not being favoritism, it's showing that you're human. And when it comes to the difficulty that people experience when they're having contradictory information from visa offices abroad, well, that means, to me, that says that we as Canada have to improve our relationship with those other countries. Because if there's difficulties, if there's challenges in communication, that means that we as Canada and those countries are not understanding what what the issue is. So we have to improve our international relationships with our partners to find out what they're looking for and what we're missing. The only way that we're going to be able to adequately address these conflicts in communication is to really have a robust understanding and agreement between our countries. So it would require me as Member of Parliament, and would require the Government of Canada to work with those countries and to really hammer out those details.
Thank you. Lenore?
The staff in Foreign Service offices are professional people, and I do have some concerns about political interference with that. Having said that, I have assisted people myself who had problems dealing with Immigration Canada, often because there were language issues, but often it was just generally communication issues, and particularly if you're dealing with an immigrant for whom English isn't the first language, they sometimes will get letters that they find very difficult to understand. And I'm going to say, I got a letter one time, well, a client of mine got a letter one time and I had a hard time understanding it too. It was written in a certain amount of sort of strange government doublespeak, but communication often is an issue, and so I'm going to say making a phone call is actually probably a more effective way of tracking down what is the problem, because it might be that the immigrant hasn't communicated their situation effectively, or it might be that the office hasn't communicated their situation. Either way, there's a good chance that it can be worked out if we get the free information flowing again.
So I'll go back to talking about ensuring that our federal government agencies are efficient and reduce bureaucracy, because these kinds of problems apply to a lot of different other topics. And so if departments are overburdened and don't have enough resources, then they can't possibly keep up. So again, that would help to alleviate all sorts of problems. And I wouldn't want to interfere in that sort of process, because I'm not an immigration expert. However, as an MP, I would advocate for every Yukoner, and ensure that if somebody just doesn't know where to find certain information, then help them as much as possible to get in touch with the appropriate department.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next question is related to Yukon Nominee Program. We understand that Yukon Nominee Program falls under Yukon government, but this program works in partnership with the federal government. That's why this question is for our future MP. So, what is your take on Yukon Nominee Program? Do you think it is fulfilling the needs of Yukoners and newcomers? I'll start with Justin.
So I think that Yukon Nominee Program is filling a service, and that's different from a need. So the service it's providing people to come work in Yukon at a subsidized rate with their employer. The difference is the need. And the need is for people to be treated fairly and equitably and have safe, secure employment. I have worked with people that have been under the Yukon Nominee Program, and I have run into situations where people have had horrible experiences under that program. What I would love for Yukon Nominee Program to be is a service that works not only for employers but also for the employees. I would love for it to be a program that treats people equitably, that treats people fairly, and gives them opportunity to really thrive in Yukon. The other thing with the Yukon Nominee Program, when we think about affordability and life in Yukon, especially when we think about minimum wage, is that Yukon Nominee Program brings people up to the median wage. So there's a bit of a disconnect on a territorial level when our minimum wage is so low, and yet Yukon Nominee Program allows us to bring people up to a higher point in salary. So we need to, when we think about treating people equitably, we also have to look at whether or not our Yukon minimum wage needs to go up. And in fact, our federal minimum wage needs to go up. So let's address all these things across the board.
Please.
So number one thing is we actually need to make sure that we have more economic migrants coming to Canada. Currently that level is around 25-26%. And so People's Party government would increase that number to 50%. We also have to be very careful about making sure that temporary foreign workers, for example, aren't taken advantage of to fill lower paying jobs that otherwise perhaps Canadians just aren't applying for because they might still be on employment benefits. So we need to make sure that regardless, we're not artificially keeping the wage low because that disbalances the local economy.
Thank you. The nominee program, Yukon nominee program, is basically set up. It's a devolution of a certain amount of immigrants to the Yukon or provincial government by the federal government. And the Yukon government or provincial government knows a lot more urgently what their needs are. So they can determine what Yukon needs locally and get in the employees. And you'll see how well it's working. That a lot of the people you'll see in Tim Hortons, Canadian Tire, a lot of the stores around town have come through successfully through that program and then moved on to become Canadian citizens, are very great Canadian citizens. We certainly heard some of those stories too, problem stories, but as soon as we heard them, we worked with the people in the nominee program at the Yukon government, and I have to credit them for the great increase they've done in their audits. They're out checking employers all the time to make sure the employer is living up to what they should, and anytime there's a problem with that, we'll make sure that happens. And I'm really happy this question was asked because I want to announce a new program that was just announced 2 days ago. The way we hear from immigrants from the previous question, one of the ways is we have roundtables, and one of the issues came up is a nominee, let's say they're in Dawson and the summer ends, and they want to stay longer, but the hotel's closed for whatever, then they have to, nationally, they have to be that one employer, the one job for the whole time, or they have to leave. So we just announced a new thing 2 days ago. I wasn't there, but it was announced 2 days ago that the person, we're going to let them come by community, not by employer. So if they're in Dawson, as long as they can go up to 1 or 3 employers, so they can stay here and have another job where the community wants them to stay, or three jobs for the same employer. So I had a person I talked to yesterday that's going to be very happy about this because he has a fleet of vehicles, he has a mechanic, he repairs them, but when there's no repairs, he wants them to drive one. Now he'll be able to do that.
I think the Yukon nominee program is one of a number of tools that we have in the toolbox. And in order to have a comprehensive suite of things that address all the needs of the community, we need to look at the bigger picture. But specific to the Yukon nominee program, I think it does do its best to fulfill a particular need. That said, there's always room for improvement. I've heard comments from both employers and employees, as well as the Yukon government and the immigrant community, on ways that it could be improved, frankly. And I think how you improve that is better communication. It is a territorially administered program, but ultimately the sign-off is from the federal government. So I think there needs to be communication between the federal government and the territorial government, and most importantly with the business community to ensure that we're meeting their needs, and with the immigrant community.
Thank you, Lenore.
The Yukon nominee program basically exists for employers. I mean, it is primarily for the benefit of employers, and most employers here in the Yukon have found that it's very successful and that it's doing what it accomplishes, which is to provide workers for them. It works better for larger employers, and so I've heard from smaller employers that the process is still quite onerous and expensive for them to bring workers in, but it's obvious. All you have to do is shop around town to know that a large number of workers have come into the Yukon and are working for various businesses here in town. And I would say that it's been very successful. One of the things that's great about it is that it's for the worker coming in, they do have a path to citizenship. And many of them have ended up staying here long-term. I've had clients who have bought homes here, so these are people who came, in many cases, with almost nothing, and have worked very hard and diligently and saved money and been able to buy homes. And that's not just here in Whitehorse, that's in the communities as well. It's actually very impressive. I would say there's a potential vulnerability, which Larry is actually addressing, which is the when a worker comes here and they are attached to one employer and they can't leave that does leave them vulnerable. It has to be addressed with strict enforcement of labor standards and education for the workers coming in.
Thank you. So our next question is also related to Yukon Omni program. It asked by some people who are actually going through these kind of situations. So it's their question. Some newcomers wrote me that there are lots of flaws in the Yukon Omni program. It leads to exploitation of the workers. Employers take advantage by reporting more wages and actually paying less. Some employers promise to make them work on low wages, but actually they do not nominate them. So the questions are, if elected, how will you ask the Yukon government to overcome these shortcomings in the Yukon Omni program? Second question, do you think that a federal agency should audit the YMT in the same way they audited the Department of Education this year? I will start with Lenore, please.
For this one, I feel like we would need more information. So you're saying, would I ask the Yukon government? I think that I would need more than, I'm going to say, anecdotal evidence about the problems with the program. But absolutely, if there are problems with the program, then the Yukon government should be asked to address them. And with respect to an audit, that would be one way of finding out how serious the problems are. I'm confident that there are some, because these kind of programs throughout Canada have created certain issues, in particular the vulnerability of the worker coming in. And absolutely, we should know, and then we should make a decision based on the evidence.
Thank you.
So the answer to both questions is actually contained in that second part. Should there be a federal audit? Yes, absolutely. Right now, under the Yukon Nominee Program, it's Yukon government that's charged with investigating whether or not there's an issue with the nominee program. And Yukon government is actually a signatory to the agreement that is set up between employees, employers, and Yukon government. So it's a tripartite agreement. And how well does it work when governments or agencies are tasked with investigating themselves?
Yes.
So we definitely need a solution where there's another body, and my preference would be federal, to audit the program to ensure that there is compliance, that people are being treated equitably, that complaints are being taken seriously and being logged appropriately.
Thank you.
I think that exploitation of any kind has no place in Canada whatsoever, so it should be investigated and prosecuted to the utmost extent of the law. Whether audit is the appropriate method to do so, I don't know, but again, I'll come back to, I believe in a fair system. And so if it's a territorially administered program, but federally, ultimately at the end of the day, federally signed off on, absolutely there has to be an account.
Thank you very much. Very well.
There's a strict contract and a strict amount of wages that the person is coming for, that the employer has to stick to, and that the employee has to stick to. They have an agreement, a legal agreement, and on those cases that that have occurred like that. As I said, the recent follow-up and leasing of it much better. Hopefully they've got those, but that is totally illegal, and the employer would be charged for doing that illegal, breaking the contract and deceiving the employee. All the Yukon government, as you know, is audited by a federal agency, the Auditor General, and so the potential there is to easily do that program.
Thank you. And Jonas?
Definitely in favor of audit and accountability. In recent decades, we've seen a lack of accountability in almost all levels of government, and that's one of the reasons why the People's Party of Canada was founded, is basically to clean that up and ensure that things are working properly as they should, fairly, based on respect. In addition, this touches on my previous comment about worker exploitation and trying to artificially lower wages so that poorly managed funds aren't. Basically, if you look at our national debt, it's exploded, right? And so these statistics are being used to shape public opinion, and in a lot of cases, even employers feel the pinch where the cost of abiding by regulations and taxes have gotten so high that it puts them in this terrible situation. And so it's not just about the employees or the employers, but it's also the government. So we need to reduce the amount of bureaucracy and also enable protections for people who are feeling exploited and do proper investigations, because one of the #1 reasons why we don't really know more about this is because they're terrified they're going to lose their jobs or get deported or something worse, right? So there's it's a very complex topic, and it would have my full attention. Even Canadian citizens are often exploited and don't understand what the labor code is or what their protections are.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next focus is on family reunification program. So, in the recent years, the immigration focus has been shifted from family reunification to skilled workers or students. What is your stand on this? Will you support the family reunification program? I will start with Larry.
Definitely, as I mentioned earlier, we've sped up dramatically the family reunification. We've also increased the age group, the age of children up to 22 to be eligible under family reunification. So that way, you have a bigger family group that gets together. We've sped up, as I said, from 2 years to 1. The spousal, we've 4 times the number of grandparents, and in the express entry, the nominee program only allows, it has 60 out of its 250 people can be out of the express entry, and of those, we've made it, once again, easier for family reunification by giving extra points when you have a family member in the country. So we've done all those things in support and enthusiasm for family reunification.
Thank you, Larry.
So I'm definitely in support of focusing on economic immigration, doubling it from its current level, just because otherwise it creates a situation where people are dependent on social assistance, and it prevents them from being able to integrate well or even have a good quality of life if they're not able to function in the workforce or don't have the language skills. And so the way to reach that 50% economic immigration is to actually reduce the number of extended family, or for example grandparents, because as I'm sure many people are aware, even though the federal government's doubled the amount of healthcare spending, we've got some of the longest wait times in the West, and it's also unfair to people pay taxes their whole lives and perhaps need some medical attention when they're older and don't basically have to wait for who knows how long to get that care. So we can't overburden our existing systems.
Thank you. And Jonas?
I think at the end of the day, we want immigration to be successful for all parties. We want to welcome people to our country that are going to succeed and are going to contribute to the success of our country and future generations. And so one of the ways we can do that is to focus on reuniting families, because it's going to be that much easier for them to integrate if they already have a support network here. If they're struggling with official language, they have that support, someone who's already here. But I think that the family reunification actually has a lot more to do with the economic side than people talk about, because quite often we have immigrant families that start businesses here, and when they bring their family members over, they are able to grow their businesses. So I think it's measured both ways. So of course I support that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Definitely supportive of family reunification. Anything that allows children, parents, and grandparents to be together is critical. And when we talk about the economics, yes, there is the work that people can do in Canada, in the Yukon, to build on the economy. But we also have to consider the other side of that equation. Because how many families right now are living in a residence that they can't afford, where they're crowded for space, where they don't have suitable, sustainable jobs, where they're struggling to afford the costs of living. So yes, family reunification is a goal, but we also need to focus on making life more affordable, not just for immigrants, not just for refugees, but for all citizens in Canada.
Thank you.
I'm very much in favor of the expanding the family reunification numbers for two reasons. First, it is the more humane thing to do. We have people here in the Yukon who have come here on the Yukon nominee program, leaving children behind in other countries, and it seems to me obvious that they should be allowed to bring their children here. But I'm going to say I agree with Jonas on some of his points. The existing families in Canada are a huge resettlement resource for the newcomer. When in the last several years we had several families, Syrian families, who were brought here as refugees, and so there's an organization, Yukon Cares, that was formed, and they did a huge amount of stuff to welcome each of the families. And it just goes to show how much is needed to actually integrate a family into Canadian society. But if it was your own family, if it wasn't a bunch of really well-meaning strangers, but your actual own brother, sister, cousin, they would do it for you, and it would be very, very positive. And so I think that it's a hugely positive experience for the individuals, and that it helps those people integrate faster, which means it's good for Canada, it's good for the economy.
So ever since I planned this debate, I've been talking to people, newcomers, what are their issues so that I can include in this debate. This was mostly talked topic. We already discussed partly in family reunification, but their focus was more on parents. So that's why it's a separate question. So every year, it has been becoming harder and harder to permanently sponsor parents to Canada. Parents are an integral part of everyone's life. If elected, will you push in the parliament for reforms on the policy on parents' reunification with their adult children in Canada? I will start with Joseph.
So as I mentioned earlier, we need to ensure that there's more economic immigration to keep the system sustainable and ensure that our economic needs are met. So if we were to increase the amount of, for example, parents and grandparents that don't have necessary skills that our economy needs, then that actually prevents those that do from being able to come and fill those jobs for which there are no Canadians to fill. So we need to take a practical approach where our economic needs are met, because otherwise we're just going to have higher unemployment, and that doesn't benefit anybody. And also, we need to take into consideration the role of automation and what that'll do to our economy.
Thank you so much. And Bagnell?
Yes, definitely, of course. Mentioned it earlier. Joseph's mentioned hoping to get up the economic immigration numbers up higher than 50%. Well, you'll be happy to know it's at 60% already. For the nominee, for the parents, as I mentioned in the opening, we have made 4 times from 5,000 to 20,000 the number of parents and grandparents. We've reduced the waiting list, a lengthy waiting list, and so it's been one of our high priorities to increase make it easier for parents and also grandparents to be with their kids for all the good reasons that the other candidates have said.
Thank you, Jonas.
I think we have to be cognizant that there are limited resources. We have an aging population of our own here in Canada already. We're struggling to meet their healthcare needs, their housing needs. And so we don't want to add additional burdens when Canadians who've lived here their whole lives, paid taxes their whole lives, are having a hard time. That said, I think there are a lot of things that parents and grandparents can contribute that are not considered currently. And I'll just defer to my previous answer that when you have someone who comes to the country, they can have an economic benefit in other ways. If the grandparents come to town, they can provide childcare so that the parents can work and grow their business. So I support them.
I'm definitely supportive, and I also refuse to look at people as a burden. People bring opportunity, they bring culture, they bring diversity, they bring growth, they bring renewal. So people when we look around our society, specifically when we look around Yukon, there's a reason that elders and seniors are so valuable.
Yes.
Because they are the knowledge keepers in our community. They're the people that help maintain the memory of the family. They help retain the traditions and the culture. They are often just a huge pool of knowledge that we just have to reach out and to use. They're there for us to learn from. So the best way that we can help these families grow is to enable them to bring in their parents and their grandparents so that they can become vibrant communities unto themselves, and then we can share and integrate with our community so we can become
Yes.
There's no question that parents and grandparents can be incredibly important to the families that have come to Canada, and undoubtedly I would like to see more of those families united. I think that families where there is a large extended family are healthier and happier and will thrive, and they can provide, as Jonas mentioned, provide childcare and many other supports to the families here. I do think that we have to be somewhat practical about this for exactly the reasons that he's mentioned, which is that Canada does have limited resources, and particularly if you're talking about quite elderly people, they are going to potentially be a burden on the healthcare system. So I think that simply has to be taken into consideration. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't let them in. I think that there's many, many benefits to doing so, but that I think that we do need to be careful and recognize that we don't have unlimited amounts of money and resources.
Talk about it. Yes.
In the recent past years, there has been a lot of hate rising related to immigration. For some politicians, this has become an easy tool to stay in news. This is also damaging our connected social fabrics. So the questions are, what is your position on this? And second question, do you support this kind of hate? I will start with Joseph.
Good question.
So as you can see on that sign, it says authorized by True North Strong and Free Advertising Corporation with some links to some other company. So it was done by a third party, probably for this very reason, to attack the People's Party of Canada. And it's not reflective of Canadian values at all, actually.
It's your
Also, as I mentioned in my opening statement, over 50% of Canadians consider that current immigration numbers are too high. If you look at where the largest numbers of immigrants are going, it's Toronto and Vancouver, and those are the most unaffordable places to live now because there's simply not enough housing. And so any system needs to be sustainable, and to just attack and throw insults, there's obviously nothing else to debate if that's where people stoop down to. Well, ironically to that free speech comment, every other party has recently voted in favor of censorship and limiting free speech. So absolutely free speech is the most important thing, because when people are allowed to express how they feel, there's dialogue that can be, that can occur, and that actually prevents violence. And so when the more censorship there is, the more people cannot express themselves, then those feelings aren't expressed, and we see problems, because if there is an issue that needs to be addressed and it's not politically correct to talk about it, then what, right? How do you find solutions if things are forbidden to be discussed? And the other thing is, a lot of, we had over, I think, 47,000 people who walked across the border at Roxham Road, and their first action coming into Canada is breaking our laws. They're not going through a proper port of entry and using, I've been polite to absolutely everybody, and it's very disrespectful, all that. So anyway, there's a cost to when people don't follow the rules, and if somebody wants to come to Canada, we have rules, and I would argue that highly likely everybody here has followed those rules. Whether it's to come in through as a visitor, as a temporary foreign worker, as an immigrant or refugee, there's processes in place to ensure that everybody can actually be taken care of. Because otherwise, RCMP reported that over 40% of people that walked across that illegal port of entry had to be deported because of their criminal past. And that actually puts our society at risk, because if these applications can't be processed within, I think, 2 months, regardless of whether it's regular, general immigration number, or refugee, or asylum, or all the different categories that people come to Canada, if we don't have adequate resources to address that, then those people are then released, and if they did have a criminal past, then you can't find them, and that puts our communities at risk. And so that's not hateful. That's just common sense, and ensuring that everybody has a safe place to live. So
Thank you. Thank you very
Ooh, okay. Absolutely do not support this kind of hate. Do not support any kind of hate. The problem with this kind of messaging is that it creates an us and them dialogue, and it's not us and them, it's all of us. There's a human race. So when we talk about hate and we talk about this misplaced fear that is put on refugees, that is put on asylum seekers, that is put on immigrants, we have to acknowledge that is just harming people. And it is not servicing anything here in Canada. It is creating distrust that does not build on anything. So what we have to do is we have to tackle that hate. We have to show people the truth of Canada. But we also have to show our truth as well. We have to recognize that we are dealing with hate here too. The fact that trans people are more likely to be murdered than any other people. The fact that we have First Nations populations that have the highest representation of children in care. The fact that we have so many different marginalized people in Canada that suffer on a daily basis. Even here, locally, at the Workers' Memorial 2 years ago, there was a swastika painted on it. So let's recognize hate for what it is. It's not out there, okay? It's here, and we need to take ownership of where it is in our community, in our country, and deal with it head on.
Yes.
I don't think there's a place for hate of any kind in Canada, really. And despite the fact that the very nature of partisan politics means it's adversarial, I don't think that the hyperbolic rhetoric that we're seeing on the rise in Western politics is doing us a favor. In fact, I think it's a disservice to our Western democracy.
Thank you. What is your stand on this?
Well, this on hate, it's absolutely, totally not acceptable. We have to be debating a person is a person is a person. We're all the same. We should be treated the same, and there's no excuse to use hate for some other agenda. We passed a motion in Parliament, M103, which is a relatively harmless motion. It's just advice, and it's not to discriminate against Muslims or any other religion. And you can't believe the pushback we had on that, both in Parliament and from the Mail, and including a tiny bit from here. So, as I think people know, how passionately fight against that type of hate and stand up against it. So.
So first, I would say that I disagree with the billboard's premise, that idea that we have mass immigration. So it conjures up this sort of picture of hordes of people sort of streaming over the border. That isn't what happens here. In terms of our regular immigration, we have large-scale but highly controlled immigration. I would say that we actually have one of the best systems in the world here in Canada, that has been very effective for a long time. I grew up in Toronto, and I grew up in a very, very multicultural city and in a very multicultural neighborhood. I went to a high school where there were kids from 50 different countries, and people got along. And it can happen. It makes for an incredibly rich, diverse culture in Toronto, in many of our cities, and then now in Whitehorse. And it's, in my experience and in my view, it's very, very positive, and it's not hordes coming over the border. The language I find inflammatory, I find very, very offensive. This sort of demonization of immigrants puts those immigrants in danger themselves. We've had here in Canada, we've had mosque shootings, we've had anti-Semitic violence. A lot of that is inflamed and emboldened by this kind of rhetoric, and so I find it completely offensive. Canada is a great country, and we're a tolerant country, but we should not tolerate this.
So we are moving to our next topic, which is the refugee system. So just a general definition by Government of Canada. Refugees are people who have fled their countries because of well-grounded fear of persecution. They are not able to return home. They have seen or exploited many horrors. A refugee is different from an immigrant. An immigrant is a person who chooses to settle permanently in another country. Refugees are forced to flee. This is from Government of Canada. So now the question is that, once again, because we have shortage of time, so shorter answers will be better. Opening hearts and doors. Will your party recognize shared humanity by recognizing the need to increase support of refugees as the global crisis increases? Larry Bagnell, please.
Yes, definitely. We demonstrated that, first of all, there was a backlog. We got a government of 32,000 legacy refugees. Claimants that arbitrarily were denied their a timely hearing. We set up a task force and we dealt with those 32,000. We also added 74 million to the refugee board so they could make the claims faster. And then 2019, we added another $208 million to the refugee board, and we created 248 more staff, which 64 new decision makers, so we could process 20,000 from 20,000 claims a year to 50,000. So definitely, we're big supporters of that increase.
Thank you, Justin.
So for this to work, it needs to be done according to the rules that are in place to make sure that people aren't taking advantage of those systems. And so actually what's happened in 2018, Canada's welcomed more resettled refugees than any other Western country. More than the United States. And more than the entire European Union. Both of those jurisdictions are more than 10 times the size of Canada. So I'll point again at the economic cost of that. It's $24 billion back in 2011. People wonder why there's so much debt, why the cost of living is skyrocketing.
Shame.
Because the more money that gets promised, the less value it has. This isn't about whether or not someone is a refugee, but about being able to handle that.
Oh.
Right? We need to have adequate health care, housing, all of these things. If we don't have the infrastructure for that, then how can we actually help those people? We have an increasing number of homeless refugees, actually, all across the country. We have, and that's not doing anybody any good, right? Because they're not actually able to get help, whether it's language, right, or even skills training to be able to integrate into our society. So it needs to be a holistic approach, and if we're not if we're not strong as a nation, then how can we go out and help more? And we're just getting more and more in debt, which actually prevents us from being able to do better and help others.
Thank you. Justin, please.
So yes, we need to increase support for refugees. We also need to look at our Safe Third Country Agreement with the US, and we need to suspend it because it's not serving the needs of refugees. It's creating more conflict for them. We also need to look at the face of refugees. What's driving the conflict? So when we think about, we often talk about the economics of refugees, but we don't talk about what we're doing to create that situation in the first place and how it's built on economics. The fact that we as Canada are sending arms and munitions to third world countries and increasing conflict. So we need to accept that for everything that we put out, we must be willing to take back. And that means taking back the people that are hurt and killed and the families that are shattered by this conflict. We also need to consider that when we think about Syria, that refugee is changing. It's not just war, it's not just climate, it's not just conflict, it's also becoming climate. The climate is going to increase refugeeism, and we need to be addressing that and planning for that for the future.
I think Canada has a long and proud history of opening our hearts and doors to refugees, and I think that should continue, frankly. I also think that Canada has a long history in another area that isn't often talked about, and that is, we all know Canadians are nice. We know that when someone steps on your foot, you say sorry to them, but the reason that the world thinks of us in such high regard is largely due to the efforts of our men and women in uniform and our veterans. Our role in the First World War, the Second World War, more recent conflicts, Yugoslavia, Croatia, Afghanistan, we've got a veteran in the front row here, thank you for your service. I think that part of this is making sure that Canada plays its role on the international stage to ensure that these crises don't happen in the first place and people don't even have to flee their homes.
Thank you.
Canada is in an unusual situation with respect to refugees. I know that there are complaints anytime refugees arrive in Canada, it's disruptive because it's unplanned migration here. But Canada is surrounded on 3 sides by water, the 4th side by the United States. It's actually hard to get here as a refugee, and that's why our numbers are as low as they are. So they're averaging recently about 40,000 per year, which is a lot, but it's about 1 per 1,000 Canadians. And then they're screened at that point, and the screening process is rigorous that we go through. There's an estimated 73 million displaced people in the world today, the highest number that there's ever been. There are an estimated 21, according to the United Nations, 21 actual recognized refugees. It's 21 million. It's a huge, huge number, and the number that are arriving in Canada is really tiny compared to the global numbers. I don't feel like we're doing any more than our share here. We are in a position that we can assist in that process. We are part of a global community. As Justin has mentioned, in the future, there's a real danger that there's going to be a lot more climate refugees. We're already seeing communities that are having to be moved because water levels are rising, and in some places they can simply move to the interior of their countries, but in some cases they're not going to be able to move. So the Pacific Islands are the ones that are the most obvious example of that. So the Green Party wants there to be developed a definition of climate refugee, which is not something that's not a category of refugee that's recognized now, that we think will need to be recognized in the future, and then that we need to coordinate with other countries so that those refugees are being distributed and rehomed appropriately. The Green Party is also in favor of terminating the safe third country agreement with the United States. It's obvious the United States is not a safe place for refugees now.
So when it comes to opening doors and hearts, we would especially like to say big thanks to our Yukon-based organization, Yukon Cares. They did a wonderful work, and some of their volunteers, they are here, and from us, we say big thanks. So next is refugees and economy. Does your party believe that refugees strengthen our communities and help build our economy? We will start from Larry again.
Okay, well, definitely, of course, yes. As I said, businesses here are really, because the economy is so booming, we're desperate for employees. It's over, every time we get new employees, they pay more taxes to provide our services. They provide a lot more, we have a lot more services and outlets and stores than we'd otherwise have without the refugees. I think Joseph might think that it's adding a burden, but it's not. The refugees is one category of refugees, of the skilled ones that actually within a year, on average, are making more than Canadians, so paying more taxes than Canadians. And the average immigrant in 12 years is on par with everyone else. So not only are they providing great economic boon, I talked about the 1,100 companies they've created and 60,000 jobs for Canadians. And so for those reasons, we are increasing the private ones, refugees like CARES, by 2020, 4 times the amount that we allowed, so it'll be up to 20,000. And we doubled the total refugee and protected peoples by 2020 to 48,700 because they've make our community a lot more spiritually, culturally, and economically prosperous.
Thank you, Joseph.
So we need to make sure that refugees to Canada share Canadian values, and it's also to be noted that there's a lot of areas around the world where neighboring countries aren't accepting refugees. And so it kind of begs the question why. And in fact, refugees and temporary foreign workers, and in many cases new immigrants, are very often taken advantage of because they feel like they aren't, or they're not successful in getting some jobs that they don't have, for example, the formal qualifications for. And unfortunately, this again keeps wages lower actually, and is inherently unfair to those refugees or immigrants or temporary foreign workers. And it really creates division. It's not, you know, other candidates might say how they feel, and it's nice. I don't particularly disagree with expressing feelings in this case, but there's a cost to all of this, right? So if unemployment numbers are demonstrated to be low, it makes it difficult for anybody who does lose their job to apply for benefits. I've gone through that myself, and I know thousands of other people that I've worked with in the oil sands who now don't have jobs. And so it really becomes tricky where you say one thing that sounds great, and then there's another problem that nobody talks about because it's not politically correct. And so we need honesty and integrity, and not try and attack people because they're trying to talk about how economics functions and what the consequences would be of basically open borders and sort of unlimited spending. We need to live within our means, and when we're able to do that, everybody's more successful.
Thank you. And Justin?
So, my values as a Canadian are diversity, inclusion, acceptance, and love. That's what I believe that Canadian values are. That's what Canadians care about. And when we talk about refugees and we talk about the cost, well, let's first off talk about something more than refugees. Let's talk about people who are refugees. Refugee isn't just a label. These are people that are being affected.
Yes.
So the people that are refugees, the people that are immigrants, the people that are coming to our country, there is a cost. But then we also address, as we've heard, that we need economic growth. So it seems like we're talking about two sides of the same issue and playing them off against each other. Our country, Canada, can grow. We can take in people. We can help people who are refugees. We also need them so that our economy can grow. So let's make the two sides work together. Let's build on people who are refugees. Let's build on our own people. Let's build on the people here in this country to make for a better life.
Thank you.
In the interest of our moderator's instructions, just giving my answer specific to the question, I will say yes.
I'm going to say undoubtedly they strengthen our communities and they do strengthen our economies, although that sometimes takes a while. And I'll just mention that for a lot of refugees, they really struggle to find work, to learn the language, and to integrate into the society. It's been fantastic, like the groups like Yukon Cares, who are providing private sponsorships, are helping a lot, but in general, in Canada, refugees do struggle, and I would support more programs being offered for them to make it easier for them to integrate.
Thank you. There's a new project which is being launched in the Yukon to help refugees. So their volunteers are here. So I would like to invite Emma and Bridget to say a few words related to their new refugee initiative. So the name of the program is that Cheers for Refugees. Emma and Bridget.
Thanks everyone. Just to start, there is some empty chairs down here. If you're in the hot balcony up there, I know it's really warm, so if you want to come down, there is some empty chairs. So as Gurdeep said, my name is Emma. Here and thanks everyone for gathering here tonight, and thanks for your thoughtful And thank you for letting us take the stage for a second. So first of all, you may have noticed that there's some decorated chairs in the room. I know there's a chair by Councillor Steve Roddick, by Bite, and by several other community members, which is awesome. So we invited community members today to bring along decorated chairs to symbolize that there's space and room in the community for refugees, asylum seekers, and immigrants. Yukon is diverse, and much of the population is new to the territory. We've covered a lot of the statistics today. So the Yukon Bureau of Statistics estimated in 2016 that only 125 refugees have come to the Yukon since 1980, which is very few. So it is our hope that through this initiative we'll be able to continue welcoming people to the diverse and beautiful community of Yukon. So in upcoming months, myself and other community members will be hosting events which we encourage everyone to bring chairs to. So keep an eye out for these events. Also remember to vote. That's probably priority number one. So you can get information to register to vote at the back there. So I'll just quickly explain some of these events. Most of these events that we are hoping to hold are fundraisers with the objective to raise money either for the Student Refugees Program or for a target sponsorship for a family of 5 from Syria.
So I would like to say that this family of 5 that we are doing as a private sponsorship, there's a group of 5, so we're 2 of the 5, the others are in the room as well. They're actually also on the portfolio of Yukon Cares. But so I'm glad that there has been a lot of mention of Yukon Cares, and definitely we need to be able to help more refugees here, like to Yukon. Like we have not heard very many, like there's not that many families, we can probably count them. So I'm also here because I work at Yukon College, and we do a program, student refugee program with World University Services. They do lots of international stuff, but also this national one. We've done it twice with Yukon College. We brought a student here, so then when they come, they are also afterwards employable and really will help our economic growth very much. We need 21,000 to do that, and that money goes straight to that student. And we are short this time, so it's really important that we get some money together. And we are actually meeting in the same place next Saturday. There's some people coming from Ottawa that will put on something. So we actually will have Gurdeep helping us move on that one, right? We're going to do some some dance. We're going to have some Middle Eastern food, and we will have what youth want to see in the future, and also some fair trade coffee and dessert. So please come out for that.
So if you're interested in being involved, check out notes.chairsandtables.org, or come talk to any of us after the event. Thanks everyone, and thanks for doing this.
So our next topic is multiculturalism. So we live in a multiculturalist society where people from diverse colors, races, backgrounds, religions, everybody gets a chance to live, thrive, prosperous, work together. We believe that multiculturalism is great. Here in the Yukon, there's a great multiculturalism spirit, which is making me very happy that people are very open and inclusive. And probably you know that in the Yukon, through my videos, I've been trying to spread the message of bringing different communities together through my Pagan videos and all that stuff you have seen on social media. So it's just a little glimpse of that. So we are doing this for 2 reasons. One is to show that we can do things together. Second thing is that we can do some stretches, because there are still more subjects to talk. we are not done yet. There are some more subjects to talk so that we can continue our conversation in a friendly way, although there are differences of opinions exist. But at the end of the day, we all are people, we are all humans. It's just for one sec. Is everybody ready? You probably can take your microphone off for a little bit and maybe come in the front of your podium.
Oh my gosh. That's an icebreaker. That's
Take a break.
May take this opportunity.
Happiness is very important. Stretching is very important too. Although next questions will be a little bit heavy.
Go.
But as I said that, we are Yukoners, we are friends. But we need to know different views too. First of all, thanks everybody for dancing. It was great, it was awesome. It shows that we can do things together in the Yukon and we can dance together. And we had a great workout too.
Oh, good question. Spicy.
So, we have a few more questions left before we end up our debate today. So this one is related to Quebec's Bill 21. Given the situation that Quebec has placed a ban on its workers to wear any religious symbol, it's a simple question. Do you support the Bill 21? Joseph, please.
So the People's Party of Canada supports separation between state and religion. This is important because there's so many different ways of life, and they're not always able to integrate well. And actually a lot of immigrants to Canada have escaped totalitarian regimes, and there's a variety of how that happens. And in particular, a lot of people escaped from, for example, Iran, where they had basically very little freedom. And they came to Canada for freedom, and that's what unites Canadians, is love of freedom and free speech. And you know, you really could show some respect. It just shows the hypocrisy.
Use your vote, not your voice here. Use your vote. You don't have to vote for them. You're also talking about.
So anyway, some people really show their hypocrisy quite often and don't treat others with the same standards that they like to be treated. And that's actually quite integral for this topic, because anytime you try and impose certain values on others that may not share them, that creates conflict. And so that's why it's important to separate religion and state and ensure that the people that escape totalitarian regimes or violent regimes, or where they basically had to, couldn't live the way they felt like, you know, they're now starting to see that same thing happen in Canada, and specifically it is political Islam. And these people were refugees. They escaped for their lives because they escaped violence, and in some cases, depending on your sexual preferences, you could be stoned to death or thrown off a rooftop, and that happens in those countries. And that's why the People's Party of Canada has its refugee platform specifically to welcome people that are persecuted for their beliefs or their sexual preferences. And just to wrap that up, thank you.
Thank you. Justin, please.
I'll be brief. Bill 21 is racist.
Yes.
Bill 21. Bill 21 forces people who have religious headgear, like a turban, to not stand in public office. So, when we're talking about institutions, it should be institution that is secular. People should have the freedom to believe what they believe.
Thank you. Thank you. Jonas, please.
No.
Thank you. Larry, please.
Yeah, I believe in freedom of religion, and the government shouldn't tell people what they can't wear, and I'm delighted that people from Becker have raised a challenge against this bill.
There isn't any question that Bill 21 violates the Quebec people's freedom of religion, which is why the Quebec government has invoked the notwithstanding clause to legitimize it. I think that our freedom of religion that's protected by our charter is a great thing, and there's a reason for it, and I find it offensive that Quebec is overriding it with their with the use of the notwithstanding clause. I do believe in the separation of church and state, but for many, many people, religious people, that's integral to their identity, and that the idea that all of those people will be essentially separated from public society is just completely unacceptable.
Thank you. Black face, brown face.
Oh, shit.
So I'll play a little video to build up a background. Probably you have seen those clips too.
Yeah, speak on that. Oh, shit. This is a good thing.
attended an end-of-year gala. The theme was Arabian Nights. And I dressed up in a Latin costume and put makeup on. I shouldn't have done it. I should have known better, but I didn't. And I'm really sorry.
So, in the wake of Justin Trudeau's blackface, brownface photos, just 1 minute please. Do you think he committed an act of racism? How will it impact future Canadian political landscape? We'll start with Larry Bagnell, please.
Well, as I said in the paper, and as Justin said in the clip, he thought it was racist. He apologized. He said he shouldn't have done it. He should have known better. I think it's important when you're doing different things, this being one, that you may not think it's racist, or you may not think what you're doing might offend someone, but you have to put yourself in their shoes. And there are people that different things could offend that you wouldn't have thought of. So you have to think very carefully about your actions. It's something I've learned in the last few months. To think twice about things, not from your perspective, because if someone is sensitive to it and it hurts them, then it is unacceptable. And I think we should also remember the big fight that Justin's government over the last 4 years to promote multiculturalism and to fight racism.
I don't think it's racist. I think it's extremely offensive, and the hypocrisy is the greater issue. It's the double standards that, you know, somebody can have multiple ethics violations and take a crazy number of personal days and call out other people for potentially misspeaking or just having a different opinion and trying to always be superior in some way or treat everybody else as unequal inherently because of all the different attacks on others. And so that hypocrisy, those double standards, and what has become absolutely empty virtue signaling it's hurting our society. It's actually creating more division, and there's no substance behind what's actually being spoken to anymore. I mean, what's the value of Justin saying sorry? He's said it hundreds, if not thousands of times. There's no value, right? If he's not speaking off a teleprompter, there's no sense that comes out. And so how it'll impact the future political landscape is we need to stop with the political correctness. It's gone to unreal extents where who gets to be more offended, right? Who wins? Who gets to determine whether me being offended is worse than somebody else being offended? Like, just, this is crazy. Like,
Thank you very much. Justin, please.
Racism shouldn't be so difficult to name. We just had a question on Bill 21 in Quebec, and there was only one of us who called it racist. So when we're talking about brown face, it is racist. There was an apology. I acknowledge that. I also acknowledge that people were hurt by this. And that's where the attention really needs to be, on the people who are impacted by this, on the people who get to face life every day in brown face and get to have judgments made about who they are simply based on the color of their skin. So let's acknowledge that, yes, racism happens. It is present among us. It is not, by the way, just something that happens. When we think about racism and whether or not it's extremely offensive, there's no difference. Racism is extremely offensive. So please consider where the attention needs to be. It's not on the mistake. It's on addressing people who are hurt by the mistake and making sure that you have conversations, that we all have conversations with those people to say, hey, how are you doing? Is everything okay for you? Are you experiencing racism? And most importantly, What can I do to help?
Yes.
Thank you, Jonas.
Well, I think by the Prime Minister's own admission it was racist. And part two of the question, I think that this is unfortunately yet another example of why Justin Trudeau is entirely unsuited to lead the country that I live. And I would defer the rest of my time back to Justin.
Lenore?
Yes, it was racist. There can't be any question. I would say as well that it's about privilege, in particular white privilege. So white people, in particular white male people, but all white people are able to go through the world not having to think about other people's and the effect that they're having on them nearly as much as the non-white people have to think about us. And 2001, that wasn't that long ago. That was 18 years ago, and I'm going to say blackface wasn't socially acceptable in my lifetime. I think it's outrageous. I would say that, you know, the Justin Trudeau's effect that he had on non-white people, people who weren't dressing up but who have non-white skin every day, that it's terribly, terribly offensive.
Thank you. Thank you. So how to stop it now? So these type of attitudes, how does your party attempt to deal with this increase in racist, xenophobic, anti-Semitic, anti-immigrant, anti-toxic, anti-refugee attitudes? How will your party respect the dignity of vulnerable minorities? I would like to start with Jonas.
I'll just defer to my earlier answers that there's no room for hate of any kind in Canada whatsoever.
Thank you. Derek, please.
Yeah, we did have this question earlier, basically, and as I said, one of the things we did is we passed a motion, 103, that basically said this is unacceptable, and it's very sad that there was actually pushback to something that should be so obvious to a country that's by and large a great country where everyone accepts everyone as equals and gives them the same opportunity, the same respect. No one's better than anyone else. And yet when we try to do something, have a motion like this, a very simple motion, and there's still pushback, so we still have a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Joseph.
So this is where things get tricky with who gets to determine what's more offensive or hateful. We have a very clear definition in Section 2 of the Charter, which guarantees citizens freedom of conscience and religion, as well as thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press and other media of communication. So what some people find politically incorrect or offensive can't be used as a legal basis for discrimination and censorship, and M103 is inherently unfair because it doesn't treat all groups or people equally, and that's very dangerous for people to be able to have free speech, because in certain cases, from a political Islam standpoint, extremist groups have been linked to pushing these types of motions in an attempt to enforce their particular viewpoint. And that results in sort of a backlash where people feel they don't have free speech. And so that actually creates division, because then it becomes politically incorrect to talk about potentially challenging situations and to maintain the safety of Canadians, especially those who've escaped those regimes. And for example, if they had stayed, would have been stoned to death because of how they want to live their lives. And so that's at risk. We need to not put at risk Muslims who've left those types, like a Sharia law state, and ensure that that doesn't happen in Canada, so that we can unite with fundamental freedoms and free speech and a safe society.
Thank you. Lenore, please.
I would say that there's two answers to that. So long-term, and to some extent short-term, but mainly long-term, we're looking at education. I mean, I believe that most of those attitudes would go away if people were educated and if they were exposed to other cultures. People are afraid of things that they don't know. As somebody who grew up in a very multicultural multicultural environment, it's not scary because it's something that you see every day, and I think that that's the long-term answer. Shorter term, we have to call out racism when we see it.
Yes.
Call out
like tonight. Yes.
It's become way too acceptable. I'm going to say that populists like President Trump in the United States have made it much more acceptable to air what are basically vile, hateful views, and that we need to call it out whenever we hear it.
Thank you, Justin.
So one of the reasons that the NDP has such a diverse slate of candidates is because we want to help people who are not currently seeing themselves represented in politics in this country gain a voice. We want people to have that advantage. So we believe in giving people that power through helping them run for office. And this is a hard one for me. The dignity of visible minorities. Like Jonas, deferred his time to me earlier. And when we're talking about hate and violence and racism and cultures of systemic oppression, we don't even have to look into the United States. We can look here at home. And if you want an example of that, I'm just going to use my time here for 1 minute to walk around the room with a simple message about what needs to change and how we need to recognize this and call it out.
We will be wrapping up in the next 5 minutes or so, very soon. We definitely wanted to talk about inclusion, then we talked about multiculturalism, then we talked about diversity and inclusion. Who will you include and who will you exclude? Talking about inclusion is very important. Yukoners do not want some certain kind of people to be included and others left out. In your campaigns, at your office, in your election literature, in your team, are you inclusive to everyone? We'll start with Lenore, please.
I'm certainly trying. We are a diverse group of people here in Yukon, and for any one of us who's standing for election, we want to be able to represent all of those people, and that means reaching out and hearing from all of those people, and yes, trying to get some of them on your team to help you, but absolutely, I'm trying to be the representative of all Yukoners, and that means I have an obligation to hear from all Yukoners, and I am trying to do that.
Thank you, Justin.
Inclusion isn't try, it's do. So that means you ask people, you ask, how are you being included? How are you being discriminated against? What are the challenges you're experiencing? And how can I help? It's not try, it's just do. It's go see the issue. Go address the problem head on. Call it out when you see it. Get involved, support those groups. Be one of those people that makes life better for other people.
Thank you, Jonas.
Up until the ramp-up when the election was actually called, my entire senior campaign team was made up of women, with the exception of a visible minority who also happens to be a member of the LGBT community and a former chief of a Yukon First Nation. So I'd like to think our office is very inclusive.
Thank you, Larry.
In my office, MP's office, 3 of the 4 people are women. The First Nations, a young First Nations person. I have an immigrant in my office now. I have a francophone from Quebec working in my office. And I've had part-time, and at the front door of my campaign, the one person that's in the campaign office daily is Muslim.
Tokens.
And finally, Joseph.
Yeah, so the People's Party of Canada is the most inclusive and diverse group of candidates. There's not a single example of any candidate actually saying anything hateful or racist. This is nothing but media attack and attack and attack.
And your leader.
And the double standards just never end. So that's most unfortunate, but regardless, I often challenge people. I show them the list of candidates with all their photos and their names and point at which one's the racist, because they come from all walks of life, all different cultural backgrounds, different sexual preferences, different genders. Like, there's no discrimination. And what's important here is really to focus on free speech, not having double standards, and not choosing who gets to determine what's allowed to be said or not. There's very clear legal definitions, and unfortunately in recent years they haven't even been respected. And so that actually puts people at risk, because in some political systems, depending on what your sexual preferences are or your gender, you would basically be executed.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you. Sorry, we have
on that note, I call you out. There are 14 First Nations in this territory, and more in the next one to it, and more in the next one to that. They've been marginalized, they've been segregated, and yes, they have suffered theft, rape, and murder by your ancestors. Where is their voice? They are an asset to you. They will teach you how to do it right. And if you do it right, they'll love you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So this is our last question of this debate. This question was sent by our queer or LGBTQ friends. So what are your views on our rainbow colors? We are allies of our LGBTQ plus queer friends. We would like to know what is your stand on LGBTQ plus and our queer community. Do you support their world? Are you inclusive to them? Joseph, you first.
Yes, absolutely, and we have many candidates, right? So this all comes to protecting everybody equally, everybody having the same rights, same protections. And if that last comment was directed at me, my parents came from Eastern Europe and have no tolerance for any sort of advocacy for violence, and I've always called that out. I've had friends from all different backgrounds, different cultures. I've traveled around the world. I've always gotten along with everybody. I've never been called a racist up until this last year when the election cycle began. And it's actually very offensive to single out people that really, there's no evidence. This is just slander and attack and attack. And if anything, decades of conservative and liberal governments have created and enabled dual, if not three classes of citizens. And that's why the People's Party of Canada has an amazing First Nations platform that will stop trying to get votes from different groups by promising money and having bureaucracy that doesn't actually ever solve any problems. We still have toxic drinking water all across the country. That's absolutely shameful.
Thank you very much.
Well, I think people have noticed over the last 4 years all the emphasis that Justin Trudeau has put on LGBTQ2 people. He made a major apology in Parliament, especially to those in the military that had been discriminated against. In immigration, there's a special program to help rescue LGBTQ people where their lives may be a danger. We've just recently also increased the numbers under that program. And the Prime Minister appointed Randy Boissonneau as a special advisor related to LGBT. He's a gay man, and they appointed him as a special advisor to LGBTQ, and he's done initiatives across the country, all sorts of things to improve the policy, get feedback, make sure they're inclusive. And we had a meeting up here as an example. When Justin came up here, he made sure he got a picture on the rainbow crosswalk we have here. So he's really pushed anything he can do to help support with programs and legislation.
Thank you very much, Jonas.
As I said in my opening remarks, I was a musician in a former life and I worked in a lot of nightclubs, and I would respectfully submit that those work environments are ones where sexuality is more openly displayed than relative to working in an office cubicle or a factory assembly line or something else. So for me, my daily normal was being around open sexuality of all kinds. And so I count many of my coworkers and contemporaries and friends as members of the LGBT community. And as I said in my previous response, one of my senior campaign team members is a LGBT community member.
Thank you, Justin.
So I love our LGBTQ community. I support them. I support all of them. And I actually take exception to the question because it's not their world. It's not us and them. It's our world. It's how we all work together. So I support all my LGBTQ2S plus brothers, sisters, trans, non-binary. You rock. You are awesome. You know who you are. And that's why when the question about how diverse your team is, I didn't answer it because I'm not about to tokenize my team. If any of you want to know who I am so grateful to have come and support me, come meet them. Come down and meet them and they will tell you about themselves.
Thank you, Lenore.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I deal with as my friends, as my neighbors, as my clients, LGBTQ plus people all of the time. I understand that for transgender people in particular, they have been literally the most discriminated people in the world. More than racism, more than sexism, it's been profound, and that even though Canada has made huge, huge strides in this area, we are a long way from being a perfect society, and everybody has to continue to make a concerted effort, and I try to every day.
Thank you. Thank you. So apart from emceeing, my job was looking at watch all the time. That's what I've been doing. So I would like to ask from you guys, would you allow our candidates to give their closing statements? Is this okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay. So 2-minute closing statements, please. We'll start with Lenore.
Well, I prepared that 3-minute opening statement. I didn't prepare a closing statement. So I'll just say, first, I hope it showed that I had taken Bhangra class with Gurdeep before earlier. And this was a great forum tonight. I am honored to have been able to participate in it. I am thrilled, and I thank all of you people who came out tonight because I know there's an awful lot of stuff going on in everybody's lives all the time. I love when I'm dealing with people who are engaged, and I'm thrilled to have been able to be part of that process tonight.
Justin?
So thank you all for coming this evening. It was a tough conversation. So like I said in the opening, please take care of yourselves, take care of each other in this, and respect what we've shared here. With what we're facing, with this conversation of refugees, immigration, diversity, and inclusion, we're talking about the impact that these issues have on people and what we need to change in order to help people. And that's what our plan's based on how we can help people first and foremost. Because we know things need to change. We know that there's a housing crisis, that there's an affordability crisis, that there's an opioid crisis. There's so many crises. So we know that we need to change, and our plan addresses that. We also know that there's a climate crisis, and our plan has a place for that too. The way that we do all these things, the way that we address all these crises is through helping people directly. Because the only way that people are in a place where they can actually make positive change in their lives and help each other is where they're lifted up. So we have to bring them out of poverty. We have to help them with addictions. We have to help them with discrimination. We have to help them find a safe country to live in. And we believe in doing that. The NDP has a plan for that, our New Deal for People. If you vote for me, then that's what I commit to. I commit to helping people and making this place, our country, the best that it can be for people.
Thank you, Justin. Jonas?
I've been campaigning for over a year now. I've been to every community in the Yukon at least once, in many cases, many times. I was in Tesla a couple nights ago. I'm bound for Dawson, Carmax, and Pelly tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. And, you know, as I said at the outset, I've got two young children at home. I've missed a lot of bedtimes, a lot of story times over the last year. But I've talked to thousands of Yukoners over the course of that, and I look forward to talking to thousands more over the next few weeks. So, you know, I didn't prepare any notes tonight. I'm not reading from the party platform. I'm not here to prepare talking points. I'm here to talk to you about my honest answers about how I feel about the issues that are important. So on October 21st, I'm asking for your support. I look forward to meeting you on your doorstep, and thank you again for your attention tonight.
Thank you, Jonas.
I just wanted to, well, first of all, thank everyone for coming and your sensitivity to people in difficult situations, people in need. I just wanted to clarify on some more on the M103 to get the facts straight. It was against all forms of systemic racism and religious discrimination. And the result was the parliamentary committee studied this, came up with recommendations, and the government responded to all 30 recommendations in fact, 5 categories: federal actions, Indigenous affairs, education, awareness, data and evidence, and law enforcement. So we'll be making progress. Lenore mentioned the need for language spaces, and you'll be happy that we're creating 10,000 more language spaces for settlement people, and also that there should be more settlement services. And you'll be very happy that we're just launching, the calls for proposal are just going out for new settlement services across the country, so people can put their proposals in now. This will help people learn about the community they're being immigrated to, help them with their language, help finding a job, and help them connect with already successful immigrants. My office also has roundtables with all the immigrant groups in Yukon. If anyone thinks they've been left out, please let me know. We get lots of great feedback that way. And finally, Justin and Lenore suggested, but climate change and climate change refugees, you know, their islands are sinking. And over 10 years ago, I actually drafted a bill, proposed a bill that would make that a category of foreign immigration, an eligible category, people that are losing their countries because of climate change. That was a long time ago. And finally, I think we should have, you've all met and had great experience with refugees and immigrants. I think we should have a great hand for all those people, the wonderful immigrants and refugees we have in the Yukon.
Thank you, Lenore.
So this is a Canadian election, and it's important to keep that in mind because all parties, apart from the People's Party of Canada, have deferred and outsourced their reliance on refugee selection to the United Nations. And that prevents these important discussions from happening, regardless of what your viewpoint is. And it's important to take note that the Liberals and Conservatives are both in support of CANZUC, which is, among others, immigration and labor and healthcare reciprocal agreement with United Kingdom, New Zealand, and Australia. And in some cases, there have been certain no-go zones that have been established in certain cities in those countries. And that's why it's so important to ensure that we do maintain our freedom of speech, because things like honor killings, child marriage, or mortgage fraud are happening in Canada, and there's dual legal system, and that's putting everybody at risk. We need to ensure that everybody's rights are protected, and that nobody's are superior than anybody else's, because that results in more division and acts of violence, which are absolutely unacceptable. We need to make sure that our immigration policy doesn't forcibly change the cultural character and social fabric of Canada, and ensure that people that come here want to live and integrate into Canadian society, so that we do have a peaceful and prosperous society and economy.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, everybody. I hope that this forum will help you making an informed choice on October 21st. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.